So, good morning and good afternoon and maybe good night for everyone that is attending this panel. I'm Juliana Gonzalez Jauregui. I'm from FLACSO, Argentina. It's a Latin American faculty of social sciences, which is based, or my office is based in Argentina. So, first of all, I just want to thank Leland Lazarus and, of course, the Jack Gordon Institute for Public Policy at the Florida International University and the rest of the institutions and colleagues that have made the second Africa Americas Forum on China possible. So this session is especially focused on the vital importance of secure supply chains and the role of critical minerals in global trade, emphasizing China's dominant position in these sectors. So two leading scholars and experts such as Gèraud, Neema, and Claude Kabemba will share their expertise on the geopolitical and economic challenges tied to supply chain vulnerabilities. So together they will examine the strategies to strengthen resilience and mitigate risks, inviting like a broader discussion on how to secure or how to ensure or promote stability in a dynamic and interconnected global economy. I just want to first, and this is if that's okay for the panelists. I think that Jiro Nima is the one that is going to start, so I want to introduce his expertise. He's a researcher, editor, and consultant with expertise in China-Africa relations, geopolitics, natural resources governance, and political issues. He has a master's degree in international development, focusing on the governance and of natural resources revenues. He has conducted research on various topics related to China-Africa cooperation, such as Chinese mining investment in the Democratic Republic of Congo and China's political influence in Africa. He is currently an editor at the China Global South Project, where he produces and edits contents on China's engagement in the Global South, especially in Africa, on issues like politics, geopolitics, diplomacy, and economy. So, Gerald, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Juliana. Thank you for having me for this discussion. I was hoping to have Claude Kabemba to start first. I think is going to join us for this conversation. So I'm going to try to really make it short in a way that we're going to have time to have discussion, to be able to unfold it, to really open up all this topic that is quite complex to follow. I've been following for quite some time to understand the various dynamics that are playing out in critical minerals in Africa and how geopolitics is impacting Africa internally and externally, and the way Africa should be reacting to the context that we are seeing right now, where we see now geopolitical trend becoming the main element, the main center point of discussion when it comes to CRM, critical raw material access. To the point where we even put at the back burner that climate change was the first element that really drove the discussion about critical raw material, because at the time when we were talking about energy transition, it was the need to develop new ways to decarbonize it, to find new source of energy. That's where critical raw material become really important. That's why we start to talk about EVs, we talk about energy transition element. But since we've put national security at the center of the conversation, geopolitical element has become the defining topic when it comes to critical raw material access in Africa and elsewhere in the global south. And we even see that in the discussion and communication, and where in terms of the wording that we're using, we moved from transition minerals to critical minerals to strategic minerals, to the point that when you try to understand the difference between all of them, only the EU has a quite clear definition of what they define as critical, what they define as strategic. And when you come back to Africa, you see there is that reaction from the AU and different countries and also different organizations, the AMDC, the AMV, saying that what are we defining as critical for who, strategic for who? And they say, no, we're gonna call it green transition minerals. And even there, you see that it's much more of a reaction than an action, a reaction to what has been defined in the global north. What are those critical minerals are? And when you look into now, when you bring that into African countries in terms of understanding what critical minerals are, you realize that in different countries, as much as we are reacting on that, you don't see a clear understanding, a clear definition on what they're calling and what they're defining as critical raw materials. I'm gonna give an example of my own country, the DRC, where in 2018 was the first time they defined critical raw material, and they only put 3 of them. It was cobalt, and germanium, and another one. And those minerals are not really for transition minerals, except for cobalt. But the reasoning behind it was more of a geopolitical reasoning and economic reasoning, in a sense where at that time when cobalt price was really high, the DRC was expecting to get much more revenue, because the definition they gave, it also came with a higher tax to impose on what was defined as critical raw materials. So when you leave the DRC, you go in different countries, you realize that country like Zimbabwe call critical raw material because the EV industry is demanding lithium for LFP batteries. You do the same for Mozambique, you do the same for Namibia, you do the same you go to Tanzania, you go Mali, you have the same kind of situation. And you don't really have a clear understanding on when you come down within each country to understand what do you call critical, what do you call strategical, and what do you do that? What's your framework? What's your vision in the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years? What are the criteria that you're putting in place to define those minerals the way they are? Because without those criteria, without those clear definition, you won't be able to engage with any other partners, when being the US, the EU, or China. Because when they engage with you, they know why they're engaging with you, and they know how to define the framework they're engaging with you. I'm going to give an example just to show that discrepancies. The fact that when the EU signed an MOU through the Global Gateway with the DRC and Zambia, especially with the DRC, about developing the Global Gateway initiative in the DRC with critical minerals, and there was a segment where in that agreement where they're saying that they're gonna be working on critical material per definition of the EU. And you realize that the whole framework was built on the fact that what the EU presenting and deemed to be critical was going to be the minerals on which they're going to work on. And from the DRC part, since there's no clear definition that we are going to be the recipient of this engagement without having real agency into how defining the terms, defining the agenda, defining the timeline, and defining where we are going, what we are putting on. And you realize that many African countries, they do lack this overall clear strategic planning on what those minerals are for, and what they're moving forward to, and what they're looking forward to. And that's why you see that what I call the bandwagoning effect on many of them not reacting, adopting the same strategy, imposing export ban of raw materials. No, we're going to stop exporting raw lithium. We're going to export raw cobalt. We're going to be exporting different raw materials to hope to gain the advantage that a country like Indonesia has gotten, or Chile somewhere gotten as well, but without even understanding how Indonesia got what it got and what was the prerequisites that Indonesia had to put in place before moving forward, and what are the regional context that made Chinese company to say, okay, we're gonna bend to the rule that Indonesia is imposing, and we're gonna be building what Indonesia is asking. And many African countries are now starting to waking up to the realization that no, we do not have the prerequisites on how to engage with that. We do not have the prerequisite on how to gain and to obtain the advantage that we wish to gain by imposing those export bans. And a few weeks back, we saw that in Zimbabwe, where Zimbabwe decided to a bit go back and say, we know it's not going to be a full export ban anymore. It's going to be on a case by cases, because they decided to take into account the reality of the market, where prices are going down and where the just demand is high, but supply is also much higher and driving the price low, and really not many mining companies not making money and not making revenue, and now asking, and you have companies like Zhejiang Cobalt or excuse me, or Tsingshan or others, or Sinomine, that's operating Bikita mine, and saying, we'd like to postpone to postpone our operation. We'd like to reduce our operation because we want to take into account all the context. And it's funny thing in that regard is to realize that the company that are asking to postpone the project in Zimbabwe, to cut off to cut off production, they're coming from China, which is the main driver behind low prices and high prices of those critical minerals. And then this is now you get to another point that's really quite important for many producing countries, is the fact that they do not have the control over production or over the prices of those critical raw materials. As much as they're producing countries, the reality is only few of them can pretend to say, have enough of resources, enough of my production, enough of reserve to be able to be the Saudi Arabia of oil, for example, of those critical minerals. When you look in Africa, except for the DRC, when in terms of 70% of world cobalt, you go to South Africa with platinum and manganese, and Gabon and other country. Only those three countries really have a world stage kind of positioning to be able to say we are able to impact the price in a certain way. The remaining ones producing lithium is widespread across the globe. It's widespread, so to the point that as much as they would like to control it, they do know that they do not have the leverage that big producing country do have. So now, having that in mind, you have countries like the DRC say, we are impacted greatly by the change of prices. We're impacted the way revenue are going down, and we want to impose export quota. And again, they're mimicking what Indonesia has been doing. We want to impose export quota to be able to control production and to control prices, with the hope to say that by controlling the production and the prices, we can really now control the revenue that we are going to have on that. And then when you look closer and you tell them that you are way behind on what's happening on the global market, because EV batteries are now changing. They're moving from NMC batteries to LFP batteries. The biggest consumer, and again, it's very ironic, the biggest leading country in this switch from NMC to LFP is China. 46% of EV batteries consumed in China are LFP. They're not NMCs anymore. China is the one funding research on finding non-cobalt EV batteries and non-lithium EV solution to allow it to reduce its own dependence, because although it has that dominance over the supply chain in terms of processing, refining, production, China understands that it cannot also rely on only a few group of countries in terms of its own green transition and green minerals development and everything. So having that in mind, you realize that many African countries, in the case of the DRC, say you were not forward-looking into how the industry is changing. And this is one of the remarks that's applied to many producing countries in the global south, that the very lack of investment in research and development within the critical mineral spectrum, to understand that it's R&D that determine application, that later on determine whether or not today your cobalt is important, or your lithium is important, or your nickel is important, or your manganese is important or not. So this is the point where, in terms of development, in terms of taking advantage, we need to be able to think of what's going to be the next 5 years look like in terms of technological trend. Instead of us reacting to what we have now, which is going to change, we need to understand what kind of minerals we need for the future in terms of investment. So it's going to allow us to determine the kind of exploration we need to do today. When countries are saying we need more exploration to find new lithium mine, new cobalt, new nickel, new manganese, you don't even know if in the next
next 10 years, those minerals are still going to be relevant. So the question is, you need to think forward to understand that what kind of application are going to put in place, and then that's determine the kind of minerals that we need today to invest in. And unfortunately, because of our 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 economic development stage, we do not have the resources, the financing, not always the funds, the money to invest in a very advanced research to allow us to know and to determine the trend and to determine where we are going to in the future. And this is one of the many elements that African countries are struggling with in this debate. So now, when you put down you go back into the geopolitical space where you have now the US, the EU, with the US with the Minor Security Partnership, the IRA, and you go to the US, the Global Gateway, and you have China. China in that debate in Africa being much more on a reaction mode than on acting mode, because China is saying, I'm not competing, I'm very much reacting to what's happening to me. And then you have African countries say, based on how much we are depending on China, we need to diversify. And when they say we need to diversify, many in the global north, they hear that no, those countries in the global south, they hate China. It's not they hate China. They just want to have more options, different options. They want to have the ability to balance different options on the table to say which one to pick better. And in that regard, in the midst of that competition, African countries says, we don't want to be choosing between China, the US, the EU, Canada, Australia. We want to work with all of them. But when you look in Europe, you go to US, the mood for cooperation is just not there. You try to understand, you say, in the context that you're finding yourself in, the way that you are behind comparing to China, maybe cooperation on the short and mid-term might be a solution for you to maintain the supply of your critical minerals, learning how to navigate the complexity of mining industry in Africa, and also maybe developing your own supply chain free of China in the next coming years. Maybe cooperation is the point. But when you talk to OCDE country, to policymakers in the EU, the mood is not to cooperation. So you come back to Africa, the mood is say we can have cooperation, but you realize that they're not always equipped to put in place the framework to manage the complexity of what could be a trilateral cooperation that involves China, Africa, EU, because there African country gonna have to manage two sets of opposed interests and how to make it work in Africa for its own advantage. And this is what gets me back to the first point I was saying: the lack of clear agenda and vision and understanding of what we want puts us in a position where, despite the riches that we do have, despite the fact that we can produce lithium, cobalt, copper, manganese, nickel, the lack of a forward-looking vision, the lack of a clear agenda puts us in a very disadvantageous position where we cannot really benefit in that in all that debate. So I think I'm gonna stop here for now. So Juliana, I think I hope I didn't go over time. I'm gonna stop here for now, and the other points I'm happy to develop them during the Q&A and the discussion we're going to have.
Thank you so much, Gèraud. It's been like a pleasure to listen to you. You're just setting up a point of discussion when you say that there's a lack of clear agenda and a lack of forward looking regarding how we understand development in countries such as African countries, but also Latin American countries. And as our colleague has not connected, I'm going to jump in and maybe present some thoughts that I've been working on regarding Latin American countries, specifically Argentina, so we can maybe compare what's happening in Africa and what's happening in Latin America, and then open up for discussion with the colleagues that are online. So let me share a PowerPoint that I've prepared just in case this happens. So this is a part of this is part of a sorry. Can you see? Yeah.
Yes, we can see.
So this is part of what I've been researching like for the last maybe 2 years, and this is part of what you just have mentioned. This is part of a global, maybe more focus in regarding European and also the US and China geopolitical intentions, that is particularly access to critical minerals. In the case of China, this China's broader energy transition policy has had like many aspects, like related to access to key transition materials, with investments, and of course related to renewable energy, but also electric vehicle supply chains. With Chinese companies having what we know, a leading position in the global lithium market, particularly in the refining and producing of also lithium batteries and components and lithium battery components. So in the case of lithium mining, big companies or Chinese companies just such as Ganfeng Lithium and also Tianqi Lithium are among the top 7 lithium producers globally. And this is part of what we can see in Latin America. There's a focus or an increasing focus of Chinese companies trying to enter the market in Latin American countries, with investments in both Argentina and Chile, and with some agreements in the case of Bolivia, which has not started like industrial production of lithium still, but there is a huge interest of Chinese companies to become part of this scenario in the case of Bolivia. So just to let us the public know that Argentina represents more or less 20% of lithium resources in the global lithium market, and 10% of the reserves. This is part of a global production scenario where Australia is still like the leading producer of lithium in the global lithium market. Chile is the second one, China is the third one, and Argentina is still the fourth one, but is rapidly advancing toward becoming maybe the third global most important producer of lithium. So as you can see, from 2017, China has become maybe the leading, or not maybe, in fact, the leading importer of Argentina's lithium exports to the world. This has been like particularly important from 2017, but in fact from 2021, from 2021 to till present. As you can see, for example, in 2021, 2022, 2023, and the first semester of this year, China has become the main destination, representing more or less 40% of exports of Argentinian exports of lithium to the world. In fact, in the first semester of 2024, China represented almost 70% of Argentina's lithium exports to the world. Of course, South Korea, Japan, and the United States are the other 4 main destinations of Argentina's lithium exports. But as you can see, China has become like a really important actor in this scenario. Why am I focusing on Argentina's exports to the world, and specifically to China? And as you can see, Argentina has 4 lithium plants that are in industrial production nowadays. 2 of them are not controlled by Chinese companies, which are Phoenix and Olaroz, which have been producing lithium for many years. But for example, in the case of Caucharí-Olaroz, that is the last lithium plant to become operational. It became commercially operational last year. And there we have Canfeng leading like the project with the majority of the assets of this project, that is Caucharí-Olaroz. And this year, this project Centenario Ratones, which is owned by a French company, which is Eramet, is also well, Xinjiang has a really important stake. It's almost 50% of the stakes, particularly or specifically 49% of the assets of these projects belong to Xinjiang. The project has been inaugurated and will become operational by the end of 2024. So as you can see here, between 2020 and 2023, mergers and acquisitions announcements by Chinese companies have amounted more or less between 22 and 24% of the total announcements that have been announced regarding like the presence of foreign companies in Argentina's lithium sector. Lithium has attracted like most Chinese investments in the Argentine mining sector, and more recently there's also an increase in interest in also exploring not only lithium but also copper in Argentina. So apart from the projects that I mentioned, where Chinese companies are actually big players, what we can see is that Chinese companies are involved in almost, we can say not 14, but nowadays 15 of the total 50 projects that are in different stages of advancement or regarding the production of lithium in Argentina. This involvement of Chinese companies in Argentina's lithium sector is more focused in advanced projects. What do I mean with this is that most of Chinese companies are investing in projects that have commenced construction of the plants, so that will start to produce lithium like and export lithium to the world like really soon. Most of these acquisitions or most of this presence of Chinese presence in Argentina's lithium sector is led by mergers and acquisitions operations. They generally start by acquiring part of the stakes of the projects and gradually take control of the majority of full control of the projects. This means that they are not only are leading in the projects, but they are also leading like regarding like the geographical. They have like a massive geographical presence in the north part of Argentina, where the production is mainly located. The production of lithium is mainly located in the country. In Argentina, in fact, there are only 2 projects that are owned by Chinese companies that have a characteristic, that is that they have no neighbors. This means that these companies have they have made possible that they have no neighbors. They have no projects that are neighbors to their projects, so they have like exclusive control of the salt float. We can come back on to this on the discussion, but what I wanted to show you is that apart from the projects that I have already mentioned, we have Canfeng leading companies that are under construction. For example, Mariana project in Salta province. Also PPG projects, which is in the feasibility phase or of feasibility stage. But also we have other companies that have made like huge acquisitions during the last 3 years, like the project Tres Quebradas, which is owned by Zijin Mining and is located in Catamarca, one of the 3 provinces that produces lithium in Argentina. And we can see that there are also other companies like Anfeng, for example, intervening or having 15% of the assets of Pastos Grandes, but the tendency is that they try to acquire like most of the control of the projects. So just to come back to the discussion that we were having with Gèraud, and I want to come back because this is part of what Gèraud introduced. Geopolitical issues, of course, have become central issues related to accessing to critical minerals and materials. We can see the case of Argentina, but also Chile, and trying to access to critical materials such as lithium in Bolivia. And as well as the Democratic Republic of Congo, which has not clearly defined critical raw materials, and the country has not defined, for example, the country, as Jerome mentioned, has not defined like a strategy regarding how to deal with critical raw materials extraction. This is the same. The same happens in Argentina. Argentina has not a strategy where lithium is like a strategic mineral or material, and we don't have like a strategic view on how to deal with this scenario. So this is more or less like what is happening in Africa. Countries in Latin America don't have like the actual control of the exploitation. As you can see in Argentina, for example, we have many companies, not only Chinese, but also companies from Japan, from the United States, from Australia, from Canada, from also European countries, exploring these critical minerals. But the control of the production and the prices, of course, is not on Latin American countries and as Jerome mentioned, on African countries, but is in control of the companies. So this is a quest of course of development, how countries in the global south, particularly African countries and Latin American countries, address this agenda, and they lack a forward looking like ahead, and how these minerals are going to, if these minerals are not going to be relevant, for example, in 20 years, what are we going to do with other minerals that maybe can become important in 20 or 15 years ahead, right? So I just wanted to maybe set this discussion also in the case of Latin America, particularly in Argentina, and we have some questions. I don't know if Tatiana or...
If you allow me
please.
to add few elements on that based on your presentation, which is really interesting because you can see the same similarities when it comes to Chinese mining investment in Africa, where you mentioned, for example, there's a lot of M&A or China buying more brownfield than greenfield. And this is been one of the characteristics of Chinese engagement in the mining sectors in Africa, and not only critical minerals, is the fact that Chinese mining investment in Africa has been led through brownfield project, brownfield being not new one, but the project that existed before, and where there is a minimal risk of failing. And this has been the China approach into mining, and it's in a way that we partner with state-owned mining companies, we partner with projects where there's already a sign of production or there was historical production before, because they don't want to invest into exploration, because when you invest into exploration, it comes with the risk of like you explore and you may be finding something, you may not finding something. Since mining exploration costs a lot of money, and they want to invest in many risky jurisdictions when it comes to mining investment. So they minimize the risk. They say we're gonna take brownfield project, we're gonna acquire new project, we're gonna acquire old project. And interesting fact is the fact that historically China always had money to invest in those minerals. So many Western companies struggling to raise capital for the investment in Chile or in Argentina or in DRC or in Zimbabwe because of international sanction, and DRC because of political instability, Zambia because of all the corruption and debt, and Mali and different countries. So they found in China a partner that was willing to say, I'm going to put money in those investment projects. This is why, for instance, we do have have the debates today where many are asking how China got ahead of many Western countries, many Western companies in those critical minerals resources where we were there before. Simple. China was willing to take risk in places where many Western countries were not willing to take risk. And when they were taking risk, of course, it was under certain conditions. It was really in a case where they pay attention to the environment. They're gonna put certain conditions to allow them to mitigate their own risk. The way they mitigate the risk in terms of debt, in terms of investment in mining, is not the same way that Western country Western investment will mitigate those risks. That's why you're gonna have criticism of China being an enabler of corruptions into the mining industry, because China would say, I'm not coming to change the way you do business here. I'm just coming to adapt the way you do business here. And that way you're going to have those kind of criticism. So me just raising those points just to show the similarities that you saw. And there's one difference though with Latin America is the fact that in that debate of geopolitical element, you see a lot of European China joint venture in critical minerals in Latin America. You have Eramet with Tsingshan. By the way, Eramet finally bought out Tsingshan 2 weeks ago on that project, which Tsingshan is not involved anymore. But you do have where European company investing with Chinese company in Chile, in Bolivia, in Argentina. But when it comes to Africa, you have the sense that there's no possibility of cooperation. This is where I raise the question: why the same European company will be willing to do a joint venture with a Chinese company in Argentina, in Chile, but will not be willing to do the same joint venture, let's say in Namibia or in Tanzania or in Zimbabwe or in DRC or in Mali. So now it comes like the context in which those joint ventures are taking place in Africa, the jurisdiction, the political context, that's may determine whether or not cooperation is possible. That's why I mentioned at the end that when it comes to cooperation, it's really up to African countries to create the context or either cooperation or healthy competition, or if there is competition, on how to manage all those dynamics. So we can go ahead with the question, so we can talk about all the complexity of that critical raw material access in Africa and in Latin America as well.
Thank you, Gèraud. I just want to make a point there that, Tsingshan, Eramet bought the rest of the... This is a really important case, because when Eramet was like ran out of money in the mid of the COVID pandemic crisis, Tsingshan came for more or less almost 50% of the assets in the project, but also has recently invested and started construction of an electrochemical plant in Argentina. So maybe this was the way that Tsingshan find the way to enter the market, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So I want to open for questions so we don't keep on talking to each other on this discussion. I don't know if it was Josh or Tatiana, the first one who raised the hand, but please go ahead.
I think it was Josh. Josh,
okay. Yeah. Josh?
Hey, I had a question in regards to the slow takeover of projects, Juliana, that you mentioned. And I was wondering, so we specifically have seen that happen in Latin America. Have we seen a similar methodology taking place in Africa of moving, purchasing corporations or purchasing companies or establishing companies, and then, purchasing those small stakes and then increasing once they've penetrated the market?
Yes, we've seen similar move happening in Africa, but the reality is that China it was very opportunistic in the way it acquired those projects. As Juliana mentioned, in the case of Tsingshan and the Eramet, is like when companies needed money, when they need to raise capital for those projects, most of the time they could not find financing or funding in the Western bond market or in private equity market. They had to find money for many to Chinese financier. I'm gonna give a case of, for example, not First Quantum. I forgot the name of this Canadian mining company is gonna come back to me. When there is this debate where they were trying to sell the asset in the midst of Canada being worried about the fact that we don't want our assets, our critical mineral resource companies doing business with China. This executive went to China, talked to Jingshan Mineral to say, we want to sell you our asset. Are you interested? Because China was willing and was always kind of ready to put money on those risky business to allow them to acquire projects. That's happened, for example, for the biggest cobalt project in the DRC. That at the end made China what China is today in terms of cobalt with Freeport-McMoRan. When in 2015, 2016, 2014 actually, when Freeport was searching for money to secure the debt he had on another project, he couldn't find money on the bond market. No one was willing to put money there. And who came along? China molybdenum and say, I'm gonna buy your share. Once they buy, they bought Freeport-McMoRan. The next year they bought the other shareholder, Lundin Mining, a Canadian company, who say, you know what? I also am gonna sell my share. They did that, and that's how Freeport got China molybdenum got control of Tenke-Fungurume Mining. And funny, in 2020 we're already in the midst of this geopolitical tension of trade war between the US and China. Even in 2020, when Freeport-McMoRan was like, I want to sell what could be the biggest reserve of cobalt, my Kinsanfu Mining, no one in the Western market was willing to put money on the project. China molybdenum say, you know what, I'm going to buy it again. And China bought that again. So you have those kind of strategy taking place. That's where China is really taking advantage of the fact that many capitals coming from the West are afraid of the risky environment that you do find in many African countries.
Yeah, I think it's Ultra Lithium. Is that the one?
You say?
Is that the Canadian company that you were mentioning? Is that Ultra Lithium?
No, not Ultra Lithium.
No?
I'm gonna find it. I
Okay.
have the name on the top of my head.
Don't worry.
Yeah.
Tatiana, please.
Thank you. Thank you both. This has been a really fascinating discussion. I can listen to the two of you chit-chatting, as you said, Juliana. A question for both of you. How do you see the really rapid developments in AI and big tech now being, having entered, shall we say, the critical mineral value chain? How do you see this shaping the trends that you've been talking about? I mean, not only obviously the geopolitics, but how are countries in Africa and in Latin America positioning themselves or repositioning themselves given this kind of really rapidly accelerating demand, not only for critical minerals, but for land, for data centers? I mean, Kinshasa just, as you know, Christian-Gèraud, just established its first data center in Limité.
Exactly.
So there's an environmental impact. There's, they're really energy hungry systems. How has this entry of big tech around the AI supply chain changed things or not?
It's a very complex question.
Yeah.
It's a very complex question to address, especially from an African perspective, where there is a very lack of, as I say, a lack of forward-looking and really underdevelopment. That's why we don't have as much as technology advancement on those issues. So you do have different perspectives to look into here. You have the perspective of in the supply chain of AI and all those technology, African country trying to produce them. placing themselves and positioning themselves as the one producing the minerals that are needed to advance all those technologies. So this is a narrative that you hear a lot coming out of the DRCs and we are producing the minerals that are going to shape the future with coltan, with cobalt, with tantalum, with all those different minerals. We are one at the center of those debates. We are shaping that. This is why we import. This is one we ourselves at the center of what we see to become the future of the world, and we see the center of that discussion.
Gèraud, I think we are losing you.
To account
Maybe
in that
you
discussion,
can.
we should have something to say in that. Okay, can you hear me now? Hello, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Yes, now I can. But maybe you can turn off your camera.
Yes, I may turn off my camera to save the bandwidth. If it's okay, you can tell me if you can hear me now. It's okay?
Yeah.
Okay. So I was saying, so the context is like the geopolitical context to say we are at the center of what the future of the AI will be, the future of the next new technology are going to become. It's now becoming part of the narrative of many producing countries, the case of the DRC and other African countries, of course, because they're looking into those minerals to say, this is our key to move up to the value chain. This is our key to become parts and real actors into the debate of what's going to come next. This is the first part. The second element I'm going to mention here is the impact of AI into the mining industry itself. Because one of the biggest debates we've been having in terms of critical raw materials is the fact that we are polluting the environment to be able to produce green minerals for the future, for green transition. So now for many mining companies, AI and all those solutions may become the solution to say, how can we make our operation greener? How can you reduce as much as possible our carbon footprint into our mining industry to be able to say that we are using green technology to produce green minerals for green transition tomorrow? So you do have those two elements that are playing into, in one hand, on the hand of the producing countries, policymakers, in those who are experts, those who are following what's happening in that field. On the other hand, on the hands of mining company themselves to really to position themselves in a way to becoming to say, we cannot be saying that we are producing green minerals at the same time destroying the environment. So we have to find the way to reduce our carbon footprints. So how can you do that using AI, to build tools that are going to allow us to reduce as much as our carbon footprint for green minerals in the future. So I think that I kind of touched upon few elements that can be part of the discussion around AI and how it's impacting the narrative and the discussion around critical raw materials in Africa.
Great, thank you.
In the case of Latin America, I think the discussion is like a little far away from what's happening in Africa. I mean, part of the discussion, and mainly maybe Chile is the one that is ahead regarding, for example, lithium extraction, because they have a strategy, they have a national strategy. They are thinking how Chile can take advantage of this critical minerals boom. And they have just recently settled like a national policy regarding how to start industrialization, and this is going to be led by Chile's national companies. In comparison to this, for example, Bolivia has a really important maybe policy regulatory framework, but they have not find a way to maybe jump in into into producing or industrializing, for example, lithium. They don't even produce industrially. They don't have like industrial production of lithium. And in the case of Argentina, we had like this discussion on how to maybe sign agreements mainly with Chinese companies on how Chinese companies maybe could industrialize lithium in Argentina, but we changed our administration almost 1 year ago, and now climate change and environmental issues and social environmental impacts, and of course the road to energy transition has been out of the discussion regarding the national politics because of our nowadays president Javier Milei. So but regarding how to deal with how we develop like a more try to change the position of Latin American countries from just being like the way or a site of mainly extraction of critical minerals to maybe be part of these big tech scenario. The problem is that in the case of Argentina, that is the case that I know the most, we have, or the national government and also provincial governments have signed agreements and memorandum of understanding, have met like many Chinese companies to maybe promote the industrialization of lithium in the country, but this has not come to reality. I mean, these are just agreements, and Chinese companies are not maybe securing that Argentina has like a different role in the scenario of the big tech and the rapid evolution of the big tech in critical minerals. And regarding the environmental impacts and also the social impacts of this extraction, there's a huge discussion in Argentina and of course in Chile regarding how these companies are entering the market, entering the territories and are affecting local communities and also the landscapes of our countries. But the problem is that we as Jerome mentioned, we don't have a strategy regarding how to deal with these problems still. Some of these companies are already implementing like safer maybe methods of extraction, such as direct lithium extraction methods, but this is not a thing of, or as Jerome mentioned, mining companies are seeking ways or how not to pollute the environment to extract these materials, but this is they are trying to use maybe more green technologies, but the problem is still there. For example, there is a case in Argentina with a river that has recently been announced to be dry because of the extraction of lithium in the country. So these green technologies are not being like as effective as we would like to. So maybe this question is related to the one that is there in the chat regarding if China is processing in country or exporting the raw materials. Chinese companies, at least for now, are just exploring and extracting the lithium and exporting mainly to China, but also to other countries in the world. And there is no like industrialization of lithium led by Chinese companies in the country.
Yeah. In the case of Africa, it's also pretty much the same way in a country like Zimbabwe, because Zimbabwe is the Africa biggest lithium producer. In the case of Zimbabwe, we've seen now 4 concentrator of lithium spodumene being built by Chinese companies. It's one step. It's not really what Zimbabwe wants, because Zimbabwe wants battery grade lithium transformation to happen, which means that they want to see Chinese company build a processing plant where we can have lithium sulfates being produced on the ground. So there is 2 companies that are working. Zhejiang Huayou say that they're having a feasibility study to be able to build that, and Sinomine are saying that in the next 3 to 5 years they intend to invest $500 million into a lithium sulfate plant in Zimbabwe, so Zimbabwe can now produce battery grade lithium ready to be used for EV market. And this is basically what we see in Africa. But I do believe that in terms of trend, there will be other countries that are going to be the winners of all these debates. Not producing countries, much more different countries, that because sometimes people tend to lose focus that the end user of those minerals, they don't buy the minerals, they buy the products that are made of those minerals. So countries that are be smart enough to put themselves in the middle of the supply chain to say, you know, I'm not going to do processing, but I'm going to build the component that the industry needs. Those countries are going to be the winners. That's, for example, you see a country like Morocco, it produces also critical minerals, but not to the extent of Zimbabwe or DRC or Mali, for instance. But Morocco is attracting billions of investment, where Chinese companies and Canadian companies are working together to build anode graphite manufacturing in Morocco, different EV batteries component and industry made in Morocco as well, to have access to the European market and the US as well. So I think that many African countries are losing sight of the fact that it's not the mineral itself that's important. It's really what you can do with it that's gonna make that country that does that be much more important and relevant for the future. And this is why I say that there is that lack of fast forward-looking vision. We are much more into the present, not knowing that the present is already the past for the EV industry or other industries that are using those minerals.
Gèraud, there is a question that maybe you can address first, and I can go into that afterwards.
No
Vanessa
problem.
asked in the chat how viable the direct lithium technology is, if it's viable, and if there's any notable success stories with this method globally.
I'm not. It's going to be difficult for me to address that to a straight point, because I'm not really a chemical engineer into that. But when you look into the minerals and the lithium battery, for example, the LFP ones have been, as I mentioned in my presentation, have been using a lot in China, because now because it doesn't. It lasts long, and it also allows a much more it's also much more it's more, what I say, it's much more available. Lithium is being much more available in widespread around the world, so it's much more easy in terms of access. The price is also low, so it allows a much better use. So this is the main element that drives lithium to be now the leading and the fast forwarding and the main element into the EV industry, where the EV industry is shifting from NMC, NMCA to much more to less cobalt centered EV batteries. But even lithium, they're now moving beyond lithium. We see now sodium ion batteries being built and everything. But it's going to take a bit of time to move away from lithium. But we see that the industry is constantly evolving in the way that they want to move. They want to go towards a much more cheap, much more accessible, much more viable, almost everywhere in the world, materials to allow them to build those technology. So but for the rest, I think I'm gonna if there is a chemical engineer that can really help us to dig deep in this question, that is welcome.
Just a comment regarding Vanessa's question and also what you said. We are not engineers, but what I can say is that apart from this method, what maybe most of the companies are trying to make steps forward are regarding how to maybe integrate the recycling phase of the production, right? So maybe part of this discussion regarding how to to make these extraction methods, and also and how mining companies are engaged in this production is regarding how they recycle, for example, afterwards. So part of the discussion includes how companies are dealing with how to recycle materials, not only regarding how they make this extraction like more green, but also or greener, but also how they contribute, for example, with environment regarding how they produce. Most of or part of the companies that are investing in Argentina, and this is more the case of Chinese companies, but there are also other companies such as Korean companies that are doing the same. They are installing not only ways to, or are installing ways to recycle these materials, but they are also involving into maybe investing in renewables. They are setting solar plants so they can, part of their electricity comes from solar plants surrounding the lithium plants. So this whole environment of production of lithium is greener. So this is part of also of the discussion that we are trying to have. Okay. I don't know if anyone can if anybody else wants to jump into the discussion, because I had some other questions. Oh yes, Josh, please go ahead.
Just bringing this up again. So, as in regards to the environment, so we're talking here transnational or transregional, but in narrowing it down to sort of the national level, each country has their own environmental laws, environmental regulations, and as we've seen with Argentina, just political motivations depending on which way elections go. So as an example, in a recent survey from WaterAid, I think this was in Ghana, 75% of those surveyed said that it was lucrative to mine for gold, but at the same time, they said that they acknowledged that 97% of them acknowledged that it was harmful to not just the environment, but to the people that were working it. So we're kind of addressing issues from the standpoint of the transregional, but narrowing it down to the nation itself. You have some countries that care more about their people than others in the regards of their health and their environment. How would you say, from the U.S. Perspective of engaging in investments in Africa, is how do you compete with China, in the case that we've mentioned before, that sees that as a more lax view rather than the U.S. Taking a more aggressive view on, I guess, exploitation of the environment in that regard?
This is a very interesting question, and my answer will be, I think I gave that answer a few months back in DC during a session where we were talking about that Western countries, the US or any EU country, seems to be shy when it comes to environment, when it comes to minerals, when it comes to critical minerals in general. They talk about environment, they talk about ESG. But let's not forget that many Western countries and many Western companies, their record is not as clean as when it comes to oil oil activities. So there is a precedent where many Western companies, in terms of when it comes to oil exploitation, there's really no qualm into either polluting the environment or into being much more quote unquote relaxed when it comes to environmental laws related to oil to the oil industry. So that's the reality of. This is where the debate gets really interesting, because when it comes to mining industry, there is a kind of double standard to say, we are much more aware of the impact of environment here, but when it comes to the oil industry, like, it's we are used already to have that happening because oil is oil and we need the oil. So yes, now to that being said, to answer your question, how to compete with China, as I'm gonna say, I'm gonna use the word that Jose Fernandez used. He used to use that. I mean, a few weeks back, and since he's been appointed in the U.S. by saying that the U.S. is not going to do the race at the bottom. Like, we're not going to come and compete to do who's going to adapt to the worst kind of environmental situation. But the reality is the U.S. needs to take into account the reality on the ground to say, how are we going to approach those situations? Because you cannot do better if you're not on the ground. You're going to have to learn by doing. You're going to have to be present, because for you to compete, you need to be present. If you're not present, you cannot compete. You cannot compete with those countries. You cannot compete with China. For you to compete, you need to be present and say, how can we start small on different projects, in different approaches, use small projects where we can really control them, be able later on to scale up on bigger projects so we can learn. And as I say, they cannot be using because the environmental laws, for example, in X countries are not as the way we want them to be, that we're going to disregard completely that country. We're not going to go there. The reality is, as I say, for the oil industry, they still can make exception. They can still move forward. So that same mentality, if they really want to compete, they can actually do that. They can actually do it. There just needs to be much more into approaching risk environment. And then I do believe that ESG factors are not really the biggest danger in terms of engaging with those countries. The bigger risks are much more related to governance issues and corruption and political instability more than ESG. ESG, most of the time in the mining industry, ESG norms suffer in reaction of a very hostile business environment. Mining companies will tend to cut costs, to cut corners on ESG elements because of they need to adapt to a corrupted and stable, difficult mining jurisdiction where they do their operations. So this is, I think, the comment I'll make on that.
Tatiana, I think you asked regarding how Gerard then developed again this strategic thinking. She's asking on the chat, how can producers of critical minerals best develop the capacity to develop the products to move up the AI value chain, given the absence of strategic thinking?
I can add to that. I know I know. I'm sorry, I'm asking the impossible questions, but these are some questions that I've been struggling with, and I asked that because in the where I sit in New York, we've had a lot of discussions in and around the UN and this last UN General Assembly about how to ensure that the global majority benefits from technological innovation and so on. And the thinking, the narrative here has been, well, it's capacity building. It's making sure that the global South has access to compute resources, to technology, to achieve the SDGs. But it really is seen through the frame of kind of a development exercise. So that UNDP now has developed a large division on technology, capacity building around technology. I mean, is that the best approach to developing the capacity that Christian-Gèraud, you mentioned is needed to have these countries move up the value chain and develop the products, not just the critical minerals.
Yes, that could be an approach to really help them to advance in that value chain. But in reality, of AI in those producing countries, it's I don't want to be harsh, but it's non-existent. It's really not part. It's not existent in a way that the basic prerequisites to be able to exist in that part of the debate, it's not even there. It's not even there. So in those countries, being DRC, Zimbabwe, Namibia, Zambia, and everything, when you have that discussion, it's a very, I'd say, it's a very basic discussion in terms of what's the next phase of processing and refining can be done into that space. It's not really what can we do in terms of AI. The AI part really comes far away in terms of like what's our role as us producing countries of those materials that are going to be transformed, but in a way that what can we do us to be present in the value chain of AI based on what do we have with our critical raw material. Is not even that, because as I said in my comment, we are stuck into the present, thinking that that's the present, but it's already the past, not understanding that the future in terms of technology needs to be invested in R&D, research and development, to be able to know what kind of technology we need for the future. And many African countries, not only African countries, many countries in the global south, they are just not well equipped. That's why I do believe into the debate of CRM access. We may not like it, but the way things are shaped, the way the imbalance of technology development is set, many producing countries will miss the mark of that, of the new technology, of the transition that needs to happen. We remain still the producers of those minerals, but we won't be able to sit on the table to be able to dictate the terms, because there is the key, as I don't repeat myself, but knowing what's going to come tomorrow in terms of research and development is the key to even determine if what I have on the ground is valuable today or not. This is the comment I can make. I hope that I've been able somehow to address this complex question.
Gerald, I'm when I listen to you and I think about, also I try to make a parallelism to Latin American countries, and the problem that we have in Latin America is that we are not strong enough to deal with these geopolitical and geopolitical contention on ourselves. So some of the discussions always between academics and also maybe other stakeholders try to say that maybe the way would be like to have like a regional strategic view, for example, between the countries in the lithium triangle, or between, for example, Argentina and Brazil, with in Brazil with a big automotive sector that could like set Argentina to become part with Brazil of this part of, as you said in the case of Morocco, like intervening maybe in the middle of the supply chain. But the problem is that, for example, in Argentina nowadays, Argentina is looking like the world like really differently from other countries in South America. So I wanted to ask you about what's the case of African countries, for example.
It's the same thing. We have the same debate in Africa, where we're talking about the possibility of having regional approach to Southern African countries, to create a hub of green minerals to develop the market, with South Africa being the main market, and producing countries like Zimbabwe, and transformation happening in Mozambique and everything. But the reality is that we do have now two dynamics that take into place. You have the dynamic of cooperation and the dynamic of competition. Cooperation is the sense that we pool all our resources together and we take advantage of what we have to build that. But the dynamic of competition is stronger because of the nature of those minerals. It's how you convince countries, a country like Zimbabwe, first producer of lithium in Africa, to say, you know what, you're producing the lithium, but the transformation will happen in Mozambique, because Mozambique has much as electricity to sustain the kind of industry. And Zimbabwe, counting on its lithium to become a geopolitical a very powerful geopolitical countries as well. Because something that we tend to forget, natural resources are also assets for hard power. So you cannot hope and expect that country that's realize that I do have resources that will allow me to become a mid-level or mid-regional power to just give up on that in the name of economic and regional integration for economic advantage. And this is also not forgetting that there is an internal dynamic political economy of each country where natural resources are used to either help political parties in power, help the government and everything. So each solution, so the solution that will involve that a country to seize
We are losing you again.
is not welcomed in a sense like we cut the video to be able to speak. So I think that's good. That's good now. So yes, so it just means that a country that's going to be afraid to say, I'm not going to lose my advantage to my neighboring country just to avoid that. I'm going to give two examples related, one to DRC and Angola and the other related to DRC and Zambia. DRC and Zambia signed in 2022 an MOU to build a regional EV value chain. It's not 2 years later, almost 3 years now. Why is it failing? Is it failing because at the end, the two countries do not agree on where to build the processing plant? Zambia wanted to be built in Zambia because they have powers and they have power and everything. DRC says, no way, I'm the one producing the cobalt and the copper. It needs to be built on my side. And now, even not mentioning the cross-bordering tension between regional communities that are taking place there, because mining industry creates jobs, and those jobs are really necessary and demanded by government to be able to sustain the legitimacy and everything. So the second example would be the Lobito corridor that I think it was mentioned before, where we are talking about Lobito corridor to be the Benguela railway in Angola, to connect it with the DRC because it's part of the DRC as well, and Zambia to be able to evacuate natural resources. And now you have certain discussion happening in the DRC, people saying that, we have historical tension with Angola, and it won't be wise for us to only rely on Angola railway to export our natural resources. We have to build our own, we have to refurbish and build our own railway from the mining zone to the ports on the other side of the country, even if it's going to cost us way more money than just connecting to Angola. So you do have all those dynamic of competition and cooperation that take place that just makes it difficult for countries to sit on the same table to say, you know what, I'm going to give up on this. You're going to take this. This is much more complex. That's why, for example, you have the Africa Mining Vision, the Africa Mineral Development Center. They've been putting out policies, but each countries are either struggling or either just say they don't want to implement them because each country wants to be the man in charge. Each country wants to be the one leading the conversation related to the future of its own minerals. Yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking also maybe more broadly how for example the United States, for example, the Inflation Reduction Act, and also on the way that the plan, for example, for the era of the Net Zero Critical Mineral Raw Material Act that the European Union has recently launched, but also what Canadian and also the UK are also setting their ways to maybe implement this de-risking and these global subsidies, or
Yes.
trying to. I'm thinking. I always try to think from the point of view of Latin America, just
Yes.
seeing us as countries of, and this is, I think this is the case of Africa as well, of African countries. us or countries in the global south, particularly African and Latin American countries, being providers of natural resources, natural resources, and the dependency that these global chains or supply chains have led our countries to deal with, and how we need, like, for example, financing to develop these technologies that you are talking about, that we need in countries and in Latin America and Africa to maybe move up the value chains, and also how to maybe develop, like, the financing and the need for resources to activate these value chain, the addition of value to our products, to maybe be part of. But at the same time, we have these, for example, the Inflation Reduction Act in the United States, and Europe having the Raw Material Act, and many other regulations that are maybe, I think, complicating even more the place that countries in the global south, such as African and Latin American countries, can take in this scenario, right?
Yes, it's definitely complicating. All those initiatives are very complicating the ability of the African countries in Latin America to navigate the complexity that we are facing now in mid of geopolitical tension around critical raw materials. What you're mentioning is also interesting in a sense where we can see that despite all those initiatives, governmental initiatives, because I have to emphasize that you can still see that many European Western countries are still struggling into the initiative, because they don't have the tools to compete when it comes to competition with China in that regard, because they need to rely on the private sectors to follow them and to align with the vision and the agenda to say we are going to compete with China in that regard. But when their own private sectors are still willing to do business with Chinese in those critical raw materials, and this is, I'm going to mention a point that was really interesting. There was a case of a Canadian company based in Toronto, because they wanted to invest to build a joint venture with the Chinese company. That Canadian company decided to delocalize its office from Toronto to another country just to be allowed, just to be able to get Chinese money to invest into Morocco. So that just tells you sometimes how private sectors in Canada, in the US, in the UK, in Europe are at odds with the political decision that policymakers are taking in Washington, in London, in Brussels. So this is, I think, the part where many in the West, they have to struggle with. That's why, for instance, in the last MSP, Manual Security Partnership meeting they had in New York a few weeks back, they put the advice, they called private companies to find the way how to create an ecosystem that's going to finance and to create an ecosystem that's going to de-risk many mining jurisdictions in the global south, so private sectors are incentivized to go to invest in those countries. But when you talk to DFIs and to other financial organizations, they're going to tell you the risks are still too high. There is too much unpredictability in those countries for us to be able to ensure the investment of those private companies in Africa. That's why, for example, Eramet will have difficulties to build a joint venture in Gabon with a Chinese company, but we'd say, yeah, you know what, Argentina and Chile seems to be much more stable. We can do business there. This is just to tell you that there's no ideology driving European private companies toward China. They're private companies, they are publicly listed company, they're driven by money. And if money is coming from China, they will take money coming from China and they will keep on moving forward with that. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I think we are running out of time. So thank you so much, Gèraud. Thank you so much for the rest of the participants that have made this discussion so fruitful. As we are running out of time, the discussion has centered, of course, on the geopolitical challenges of accessing critical minerals in Africa, but also in Latin America, focusing on what Gèraud mentioned at the first part of this presentation, is that the lack of a clear definition and strategy in countries such as the Democratic Republic of Congo, Zimbabwe, and Kenya, and of course, I try to make an example in the case of Latin American countries. Without such a solid and strategic framework, African nations and also Latin American countries are struggling to engage effectively in global with global actors such as the US, European countries, or the European Union countries, and China. We are going to go back to the main session that is led by Leland. Thank you so much again, and see you during the rest of the day. Thank you so much for this panel.
Thank you.